Anna Miller was 32 years old and had hands of warm water, hands that cleaned in silence, but that felt every crack in the houses where she worked, every old stain in the grout, every forgotten corner where dust collected like a kept secret. She lived in the humble neighborhood of Oakwood Creek, in the coastal city of Port St. Vincent, in a small rented room on the second floor of a walk-up with thin walls, where the noise from the neighbors mingled with the smell of fried food from open windows and the barking of stray dogs. Every morning, before the sun even tinged the horizon over the ocean with pink, Anna caught the same grey bus on the corner by the bakery. The vehicle would climb slowly up the coastal highway, cross the overpass, and enter the gated community of Ocean Ridge Estates, where three-story mansions hid behind white walls, electric gates and cameras that blinked red lights like vigilant eyes. It was another world, a place where silence was expensive and where the footsteps of housekeepers made no sound on the imported marble floors. The mansion of the businessman Michael Reyes was at the end of the main street, surrounded by tall palm trees and a garden that looked like it was straight out of a magazine. Inside, besides the family, lived Michael's father, Mr. Ernest Reyes, an 80-year-old man whom his son's money had been slowly hiding away, like someone drawing heavy curtains over the daylight. Anna carried a quiet bravery, the kind that doesn't show up in grand gestures, but in small, daily acts of resistance. She saw injustice happening around her, but swallowed her words before they reached her lips. For years she had carried the guilt of not defending an elderly neighbor when he was evicted from the small room he rented, 3 doors down from hers. The old man had been thrown out on a rainy afternoon, his belongings in bundles on the sidewalk and nowhere to go, and Anna had stood at her window, motionless, watching it all without moving a muscle. Since then, her fear wasn't so much about losing her job, but about speaking up and discovering that no one took her seriously, that her voice didn't have enough weight to change anything. Every morning, before she started scrubbing the enormous beige marble floors, Anna would say a quiet prayer in front of a small magnet of the Virgin Mary stuck to the door of the mini-fridge in the utility room. She would close her eyes, join her calloused hands, and murmur pleas for protection for her children, for strength for the day, and for the courage not to stay silent when it mattered. The prayer lasted less than a minute, but it was the only moment she felt heard by anyone. Her relationship with Mr. Ernest had been born from small details, the kind that seem insignificant but build invisible bridges between people. A cup of warm coffee. She would sneak to him in the guest house out back, where he spent his afternoons alone staring out the window. The caring way he asked about her children, as if he'd known them his whole life, even though he'd never even seen their pictures. The tremor in his hand when he held the cup and said in a low voice, "Sometimes it's worse to be alive and not be able to decide anything, my dear. Sometimes a prison doesn't even have bars." To Anna, Mr. Ernest was the grandfather she had lost too soon, the only man in that house, who treated her like a person, not like a piece of furniture that cleans other furniture. On that Tuesday in November, Anna had 2 clear goals tucked away in her heart. First, to find out if the recent bruise on Mr. Ernest's arm was really from a fall, as Yolanda, the head housekeeper, claimed, or if there was another explanation no one wanted to give. Second, to find a moment alone with the old man to understand what he meant the week before, when he had whispered with dry lips, almost breathless, "They want to shut me up." The obstacles were as clear as glass walls. The practical obstacle: Yolanda had changed the house's routine. She now kept the guest house locked with a new key and noted every minute of the staff's time in a logbook that always sat on the small table next to the pantry inventory. The emotional obstacle: Anna's old fear of being labeled a troublemaker, of losing the one job where she was paid on time without delays or excuses. While she checked the kitchen cabinets, inspecting the food containers, and mentally noting what needed to be restocked, Anna was also storing away other details. The large industrial chest freezer in the basement, which she had to defrost every Friday. The deep rhythmic hum of its motor, which echoed up the concrete stairs even with the door closed. Her keychain, which hung from the pocket of her apron with a small metal cross her mother had given her years ago. The voice recorder function on her old phone, which she had used before to memorize complicated shopping lists that her employers dictated too quickly. Small things that went unnoticed by others, but that she kept like unnamed tools waiting for the right moment. Late that morning, as she wiped down the window overlooking the backyard and saw no movement in Mr. Ernest's guest house, Anna felt a silent urgency tighten in her chest, like an invisible hand. She glanced around to make sure she was alone, slipped her hand into her pocket, and touched the metal cross. Then she quickly made the sign of the cross, her fingers still damp with soap, and murmured in a voice so low it was almost inaudible, more to herself than to any saint, "God, give me eyes to see and the courage not to stay silent." The midday light streamed through the open windows, bringing with it the song of the garden birds and the smell of chlorine from the freshly cleaned pool. But underneath it all, like a wrong note in a familiar song, something was off. Anna knew it. And it wasn't the first time her body had sensed danger before her mind could give it a name. She folded the cleaning rag carefully, put the bucket away in the closet, and walked back to the hallway that led to the guest house. Every step was calculated, measured, silent. Her eyes were alert. Her heart was beating faster than normal. Something was happening in that house, something the rich were hiding behind locked doors and polite smiles. And Anna Miller, the woman no one listened to, was about to find out what it was. The cleaning routine seemed the same as always, but on that Tuesday the air smelled different. In the hallway leading to Mr. Ernest's guest house, Anna noticed a faint trail of strong chlorine, too recent to be from the regular pool cleaning. It was the kind of smell someone uses to hide another smell, to erase traces. The birdsong from the garden was muffled by the echo of laughter from the pool area, where Michael's friends discussed investments over glasses of white wine, and by the soft music drifting from the French doors of the main living room. Money made noise. Humble work, on the other hand, moved in silence. While cleaning the iron railings of the staircase leading to the second floor, wiping the cloth in rhythmic circular motions, Anna overheard voices through a half-open office door. Michael's dry, controlled voice said, "If we sign today, the bank won't ask to see my father. Dr. Ramirez's report is enough for everything." Another voice, male and nervous, replied, "But that night nurse has been asking too many questions. They're better not to call her again, right?" A brief silence. Then Michael's laugh, short and humorless. "I already cancelled her contract. Problem solved." Anna kept wiping the railing as if she hadn't heard a thing, but her fingers trembled so much she almost dropped the bottle of furniture polish. She swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and continued to the kitchen. Inside, Martha, the cook, a sturdy woman in her late 50s with the tired smile of someone carrying the world on her shoulders, pushed a deep plate of still hot rice and beans toward Anna. "Eat quickly, girl, they're going to need you late today," she murmured, without making eye contact. Martha had her own reasons for obeying without question. A daughter, a nurse, who had been unemployed for months, and a husband with a ruined back after years of working in construction. In the security booth at the entrance, Julio, the guard, reviewed the security camera monitors, noting arrival and departure times in a hardcover logbook. He, too, lived on that salary and endured silent humiliations to pay the lawyer for his nephew, who had been wrongfully arrested months ago for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. In that house everyone wore invisible shackles. Anna ate standing up, leaning against the kitchen counter, chewing slowly as she thought. After washing her plate and drying her hands on her apron, she gathered her courage and asked in the most natural voice she could manage, "Ms. Yolanda, is Mr. Ernest okay? I haven't seen him in the garden for days." Yolanda, who was arranging clean towels on a shelf, turned slowly and looked her up and down. She was a thin woman, her hair pulled into a tight bun, with eyes that seemed to measure a person's worth in seconds. She clutched the logbook to her chest like a shield and replied with calculated coldness, "Mrs. Reyes has already hired a private caregiver for Mr. Ernest. You just clean. Don't meddle in things you don't understand." The social humiliation hit like an invisible slap. Anna lowered her eyes, feeling the heat rise up her neck, and nodded silently. It was Yolanda's way of putting her in her place without raising her voice. In that instant, Anna wasn't a person. She was just a function, a housekeeper, a nobody. Later, when she tried to get closer to the guest house, taking advantage of Yolanda's trip to the market, Anna found the door locked with a new, shiny padlock that hadn't been there last week. She peeked through the side window, cupping her hand against her forehead to block the sun's glare on the glass. She could only make out the shadow of an unmade bed, a blanket tossed aside, and on the nightstand in the distance, a half-empty bottle of pills. A material obstacle. No keys, no access, no proof. But Anna didn't give up. She pretended to be cleaning the window frame, dipping her cloth in a bucket of water and vinegar, and wiping slowly, paying attention to every movement around her. That's when Mr. Ernest appeared, a vague shadow behind the thin curtain. He approached the glass and pressed his trembling palm against it from the inside. Anna's heart pounded. She glanced quickly to her sides, making sure she was alone, and pulled her old phone from her pocket. With fingers slick with nervous sweat, she activated the recorder, brought the device close to the edge of the window and whispered, "Mr. Ernest, are you okay?" On the other side of the glass, the old man's mouth moved slowly. The voice that came through was faint, a thread of sound nearly lost in the wind. "Don't let them lock me. Downstairs. Cold." Anna hit the stop button with trembling hands, slipped the phone back into her pocket and took a deep breath, the air burning in her lungs. If Yolanda saw her with her phone out during work hours, it would be grounds for a pay deduction or even firing for breaking internal rules. That small piece of evidence had cost her a peaceful lunch. She didn't have time to sit. She ate standing, leaning against the pantry wall, while she finished filling out the inventory of frozen meats in the large industrial freezer in the basement. The constant hum of the motor echoed off the concrete walls, deep and hypnotic, as if trying to hide other sounds. Mr. Ernest had said downstairs and cold. Anna looked at the door to the basement, also secured with a padlock, and felt an icy chill run up her spine. When Martha passed by, carrying a tray with chamomile tea for Mrs. Reyes, the cook paused for a moment, looked around, and whispered very close to Anna's ear, "If something smells wrong to you in here, find Father Michael. He doesn't owe these rich folks anything." Anna nodded, but her throat was so tight she could barely say thank you. The fear returned, heavy as a stone in her stomach. Fear of being crazy, fear of being right, fear of speaking up and being crushed like an ant. She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the second-floor bathrooms, washing the living room windows, and vacuuming the Persian rugs in the library. Mechanical work that left her mind free to wander. And as she worked, the pieces began to fall into place. The bruise on Mr. Ernest's arm. The night nurse suddenly let go. The medical report Michael would use at the bank. The locked door. The smell of chlorine in the hallway. The old man's words, "They want to shut me up." And now, his warning, "Downstairs. Cold." Anna put the vacuum away in the utility closet, hung her apron on its hook, and went to wash her hands in the sink. She looked at her own reflection in the stained mirror above the faucet. She saw a 32-year-old woman, brown hair in a ponytail, dark circles under her eyes, hands rough from so much washing and scrubbing. An invisible woman. But invisible doesn't mean non-existent. She dried her hands on a dish towel, lightly touched the metal cross on her keychain, and whispered to herself like someone making a promise, "I'm not going to let it happen again." And in that instant, something inside her shifted, a decision that didn't have a name yet, but already had a shape, something that felt like courage. Michael Reyes's power wasn't just visible in the size of his mansion, the art on the walls, or the imported cars in the 3-car garage. It was in the way people lowered their voices when he entered a room, in the way Yolanda straightened her back and fixed her hair when she heard his footsteps, in the way even his wealthy friends measured their words before disagreeing with him. Michael was 45, wore a suit even at home, and kept his beard neatly trimmed and his hair styled with a touch of gel. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was with his mouth, never his eyes. He had eyes accustomed to making decisions. For others, to calculating costs and benefits before any act of kindness. His motivation was as simple and cold as a scalpel's blade, to maintain total control of the family business and preserve the image of the exemplary son that society admired, even if it meant making his own father appear weak, incompetent, and faded behind medical reports signed on letterhead. Dr. Ramirez, his functional accomplice, wasn't some cheap soap opera villain. He was a doctor from an affluent neighborhood, competent in his field, with a framed diploma on his office wall and a solid reputation among his clientele of important surnames. But over the years he had accepted favors and tokens of gratitude, small lapses that had accumulated into a moral debt from which he no longer knew how to escape. He justified the sedative prescriptions by telling himself that Mr. Ernest suffered from chronic anxiety, that it was better this way. Calm, not bothering anyone, not causing problems. His moral line was drawn with precision. He would never lay a hand on someone to kill them, never inflict direct physical harm. But he didn't hesitate to sign papers that locked a man inside his own body, slow and chemical, and almost invisible. Anna's first major breakthrough came on a Friday, when she had to organize the inventory for the basement freezer. It was a monthly task, tedious and cold, that Yolanda always delegated to her because housekeepers are for heavy lifting. Anna went down the concrete stairs, flipped on the dim light in the underground hallway, and opened the logbook that hung from a hook on the wall. As she checked the trays of meat, packages of chicken, and tubs of imported ice cream, her eyes fell on another, smaller notebook forgotten in the corner of a metal shelf. It was the medication delivery log that Martha kept hidden there, away from her boss's eyes, because the cook was also responsible for receiving pharmacy orders. Anna opened the notebook carefully, flipping through the pages. The delivery dates for Mr. Ernest's medications were written in Martha's round handwriting. September 15th, September 22nd, September 30th, October 7th, October 14th. Something clicked in her head. Anna closed her eyes, trying to remember, and then searched her memory for the conversations she'd overheard Julio having on the security booth radio. He always complained when he had to turn off the security cameras for technical maintenance. Maintenance that, curiously, always happened on the same dates, September 15th, September 22nd, September 30th. The dates matched. On the days the medications arrived, the cameras in the hallways leading to Mr. Ernest's guest house were turned off. Anna felt her stomach churn. It wasn't a coincidence, it was planned. Someone was weaving this together with patience, like someone setting the stage for a play where the main character would be declared insane, dangerous, incapable of caring for himself. She closed both notebooks, put everything back in its place, and went up the stairs on shaky legs. She needed more proof. She needed to understand how far this went. That same afternoon, while cleaning Michael's office, always under Yolanda's watchful supervision, Anna saw an official-looking envelope in the trash can, almost hidden among crumpled scrap paper. The seal on the letterhead was from the county court. She glanced quickly at Yolanda, who had her back turned, checking the bookshelf, and carefully picked up the paper, pretending to adjust the trash bag. She unfolded the document right there, kneeling beside the can, and read the first few lines. They were big, difficult words, full of legal terms she barely understood. But a few phrases jumped out like neon signs in the dark. Conservatorship proceedings, legally incapacitated, appointment of a conservator, psychiatric evaluation. Conservatorship. That meant taking away Mr. Ernest's right to decide about his own life, his own money, everything. Legally turning him into a child who needed a guardian. Anna folded the paper with trembling hands and shoved it back into the trash, covering it with other papers. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure Yolanda would hear it. But the housekeeper continued organizing the books, oblivious. There was the confirmation. It wasn't just too much medication. It wasn't just locked doors. It was a complete, structured, legal plan. And she, Anna Miller, a housekeeper with an incomplete high school education, could barely understand half the vocabulary on those papers. The feeling of smallness tightened in her chest again. That night, on the crowded bus ride home, Anna tried to tell Martha what she had discovered. She waited for a moment when they were alone in the kitchen, after Yolanda had left to pick up Mrs. Reyes from the gym. She spoke in a low, quick voice, showing her the phone with the recording of Mr. Ernest. "Martha, listened to everything. Her face grim, her hands submerged in the sink where she was washing lettuce. When Anna finished, the cook dried her hands on her apron, sighed deeply, and said, her voice heavy, "If you mess with these people, Anna, they'll get you fired from every house in this neighborhood. They'll say you steal, that you lie, that you make things up, and no one will hire you again. You have kids to feed. Think about it." The fear in Martha's eyes was real. It wasn't cowardice, it was survival. Anna went home in silence, her head buzzing, with conflicting thoughts. She remembered the elderly neighbor no one had defended, evicted in the rain, carrying his wet belongings. She thought of her 2 children sleeping in their rented room, of the overdue bills, of the rent due next week. For a few minutes, sitting there on the hard plastic bus seat, she actually considered deleting the recording, forgetting everything, and just continuing to clean floors. It would be so much easier. Meanwhile, the subplots intertwined with the main story like the roots of an ancient tree. Julio, the guard, saw Michael enter Mr. Ernest's guest house late at night, with Dr. Ramirez. It was almost 11. Julio noted in the incident log, "Medical visit, 11:15 p.m. At that same moment, his cell phone rang. It was his sister calling from the county jail, desperate. The public defender had rejected his nephew's appeal again. "The ones without a last name have no voice," Julio muttered, looking at the security monitors where the rich walked with confident strides. Anna, rereading the document about the conservatorship that she had secretly photographed with her phone, found herself facing another barrier. She barely understood what all the words meant. Limited conservatorship, legal representation. The paper confirmed her suspicions, but it also showed her the size of the chasm between her and that world of laws and lawyers. The second direct obstacle to her goals came the following Monday. Yolanda reorganized the entire work schedule. Anna was moved away from cleaning the back of the house and assigned exclusively to the common areas and the basement. Every time she tried to ask about Mr. Ernest, the answer was a cold wall. "It's none of your business." But all the coincidences, the medication, the cameras, the documents, the locked doors, were not random. It was reality pushing Anna, with pain and fear, toward a decision she didn't yet have the courage to make. That night, alone in her rented room after putting her children to bed, Anna sat on the edge of her old bed, holding her phone. The recording of Mr. Ernest was there, saved. 2 minutes and 15 seconds that could change everything, or destroy everything. She touched the metal cross on her keychain, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. She still didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep until she decided. Night fell over Ocean Ridge Estates, with yellow lights glowing in the mansion windows, and the sound of laughter filtering through the French doors of the main hall. Michael was hosting a cocktail party for partners and investors, men in suits and women in long dresses who chatted about trips to Europe, country house renovations, and charity projects that offered good tax credits. For the staff, that night meant overtime. Martha had called that morning saying she had a fever, and Yolanda ordered Anna to stay late to leave everything spotless before the guests leave. Fewer eyes in the house. More control for those in charge. It was the kind of night when the powerful felt safe, untouchable, protected by high walls and expensive alarm systems. Anna went down to the basement alone, her cleaning cart squeaking on its worn wheels. The fluorescent light flickered twice before staying on, illuminating the white-painted concrete walls and the cold cement floor. The deep, constant hum of the large industrial chest freezer filled the space like the mechanical breathing of a sleeping creature. She opened the inventory logbook, picked up the pen tied to it with a string, and began to note the trays of meat, the packages of frozen chicken, the boxes of imported ice cream. Routine work her fingers did almost without thinking, but her mind was far away. She couldn't stop replaying Mr. Ernest's words, whispered through the window pane. Downstairs? Cold? She left the cleaning cloth on the cart and turned off the music she was listening to on her old phone so she wouldn't be distracted. She stood there in the silence, just listening. The hum of the freezer motor, the muffled sound of voices from the party upstairs, the distant slam of a door. And then she heard it. A different sound, muffled, like something or someone trying to move inside the freezer. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands grew cold and clammy. She approached the freezer slowly, placed her palm on the metal lid, and felt the vibration. She waited. The sound came again, weaker, more desperate. The freezer had two compartments, the top one, which she opened every week to check the food, and the larger bottom one, which was always secured with a heavy bolt. "For emergencies only," Yolanda had once said. "Never touch it." Anna knelt on the cold floor, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the bolt. She pulled hard. The metal groaned, resisted, and finally gave way. A strong smell of cold, medicine, and human sweat rose like a heavy cloud. She lifted the lid slowly, her heart beating so loudly it seemed to echo off the walls. Inside, lying on damp, soiled blankets, was Mr. Ernest, curled up, his lips purple, his trembling hands trying to shield his eyes from the light. His wrists were marked with fresh bruises, as if they had been held tightly. His eyes were half closed, confused, lost. Anna clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle the scream that wanted to escape. Tears came quickly, hot, burning her cold cheeks. "Oh, my God! My God!" she whispered, her voice breaking. Then she understood everything, in a flash as quick and sharp as a razor blade. They were going to take him to the hospital in the middle of the night, claiming he had run away, that he had hidden in there himself during a bout of dementia, that it was proof he wasn't of sound mind and needed to be placed under a conservatorship immediately. The plan was perfect, cruel, and nearly complete. Anna reacted with a courage she didn't know she possessed. She pulled her phone from her pocket with trembling fingers, started a new recording, and held the microphone to Mr. Ernest's purple lips. "Mr. Ernest, can you talk? Tell me what happened." The voice that came from the old man's mouth was a thread, weak and broken, but it was still there. It was Michael. And the doctor don't want to sign. My company. They locked me in. Please." Every word was evidence. Every syllable was another weight on her shoulders. Anna stopped the recording, put the phone away, and held the old man's face between her hands. "I'm going to get you out of here. Hang on. Just hang on a little longer." The first physical obstacle was Mr. Ernest's body. He didn't weigh much. Malnutrition and medication had done their work, but he was half conscious, his legs limp, his arms too weak to help. Anna wrapped her arms around his waist, pulled with all her strength, and managed to lift him out of the freezer. A sharp pain shot through her back, lashing like a whip. She slipped on the condensation-slicked floor, banging her knee against the metal and feeling a deep cut open on the palm of her hand. But she didn't let go of the old man. She dragged him to the stairs, propped him against the wall, and took a deep breath, trying to think. She couldn't do it alone. She needed help. And there was only one person in that house who might still have a shred of conscience. She ran up the first few steps and pressed the intercom button that buzzed the security booth. Julio's voice answered, sleepy. "Security. What is it?" "Julio, it's Anna. I need you down here. Now. It's an emergency." Silence on the other end. Then, suspiciously, "What happened?" Anna took a deep breath and told him the raw, unvarnished truth. "Mr. Ernest was locked in the basement freezer. He's half dead. If you help me get him out of here, you might lose your job. But if you leave him here, tomorrow he'll just be another crazy old man who hid himself." Another silence. Longer this time. Anna could almost hear Julio's thoughts on the other end of the line. The fear, the doubt, the cold calculation of what courage cost. Then his voice came back, hoarse, resolute. "I'm on my way." Anna ran back down into the basement. Mr. Ernest was conscious but confused, muttering disconnected words. She took off the jacket she wore over her uniform and draped it over his trembling shoulders. "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay," she repeated more to herself than to him. Julio came down the stairs 2 at a time. He stopped at the entrance to the basement, looked at the open freezer, at Mr. Ernest slumped on the floor, and his face hardened. "Sons of bitches," he muttered through clenched teeth. Together they managed to carry the old man up the stairs. Anna in front holding his arms, Julio behind supporting his back. Each step was an eternity. Sweat poured down Anna's face, mixing with the tears she didn't realize were still falling. They were almost at the top when Yolanda appeared in the hallway. The housekeeper's face went pale, then red, then white again. She opened her mouth, closed it, and finally shrieked, her shrill voice cutting through the night's silence. "What are you doing? You're going to ruin everything. Let him go now." Anna stopped on the top step. She looked Yolanda in the eye, not lowering her gaze for the first time since she had started working in that house. She squeezed the small metal cross on her keychain in her pocket, feeling its points dig into the skin of her wounded palm, and said in a firm, clear voice that didn't waver, "You already ruined everything." And she kept climbing. By the time the sun began to paint the sky pink over Port St. Vincent, the story had already escaped the mansion's walls. Mr. Ernest was taken to the nearest public hospital because the private ambulance Michael insisted on calling took, strangely, more than 40 minutes to arrive. Anna refused to leave the old man's side. She got into the public ambulance, sat next to the gurney, and held his cold hand the entire way, while the paramedic checked his vital signs and muttered curses under his breath about rich people who think they can do whatever they want. Mr. Ernest, now more conscious, began to talk. The words were disjointed, confused at first, but they gained clarity with each passing minute. He said names, dates, amounts, contracts. Anna grabbed the only paper she had on hand, the inventory logbook still in her apron pocket, and started writing everything down on the back of the pages, the pen shaking between her sweaty fingers. Michael said it was better if I rested. Dr. Ramirez gave me pills, stronger each time. I signed what he asked. But now, they want the company. I won't sign. They locked me up. Each sentence was a piece of the puzzle. Each word, more proof. When they arrived at the hospital, Anna hit a new wall. The ER doctor on duty, a young man in a white coat with deep circles under his eyes, read the intake form. When he saw the name Reyes, he hesitated. He looked at Anna, at Mr. Ernest on the gurney, and then back at the form. "Reyes, the Reyes family are major donors to this hospital, ma'am. We need to notify the family before any procedures. It's protocol." Anna felt her stomach drop. An institutional obstacle. Money could even buy the right to decide who got help and how. She opened her mouth to protest, but she didn't have time. Martha appeared through the automatic doors of the emergency room, still in simple pajamas under a hastily thrown-on coat. Beside her was her daughter, a woman in her early 30s dressed in a nurse's uniform, an ID badge hanging from her neck, and a serious expression on her face. "Doctor," the young nurse said, addressing the ER doctor in a professional but firm tone, "I worked for a time as a caregiver for Mr. Ernest Reyes. I know that Dr. Ramirez prescribed sedatives at a dosage far above what's recommended for his age. I have photos of text messages where Mrs. Reyes cancelled my night shifts whenever I questioned the medication." She held out her phone, swiping through the screens with quick fingers. Messages, screenshots of prescriptions, notes on schedules. The ER doctor's expression changed. He took the phone, enlarged the images, read them carefully, and handed it back. "I'm admitting him as a suspected case of elder abuse," he said, scribbling on the chart. "The family will be notified, but the patient remains under hospital care until further notice." Anna's legs felt weak with relief. Martha grabbed her arm, holding her steady, and whispered in her ear, "I couldn't leave you in this alone." Minutes later, Father Michael walked through the same automatic doors. He wasn't wearing a collar, just jeans and a button-down shirt, but he carried a black folder full of organized papers under his arm. He was in his 60s with graying hair, tired eyes that had seen too much misery, and a direct way of speaking that left no room for doubt. "I came because Martha sent me a voice message at dawn," he said, greeting Anna with a firm handshake. "This isn't the first time I've seen this happen. Elderly people treated like a burden, medicated until they can't make decisions anymore, and the family takes everything." He opened the folder and showed her a series of printed contacts: Adult Protective Services, the District Attorney's Office, the County Commission on Aging, lawyers who worked pro bono on abuse cases. He also had a notebook filled with notes on similar cases, all following the same pattern. Too much medication, isolation, documents signed under duress. "This isn't just a matter of faith," Father Michael said, looking Anna straight in the eye. "It's a matter of justice." A receptionist came over to them, carrying forms. He hesitated before handing them over, glanced at the priest and said quietly, "Father, you know the Reyes family donates a lot to this hospital. This could get complicated." Father Michael didn't look away. "Then it will get complicated. But this man is not going back to that house as long as I can do something about it." The facts weren't confirmed by magic. They were built brick by brick, proof by proof, using everything Anna and the others had gathered over those terrible days. The recording of Mr. Ernest's broken confession, the notes in the inventory logbook showing the days when more sedatives arrived, the security camera logs with technical maintenance always at the same times, Julio's testimony about the orders to turn off the monitors, the text messages Martha's daughter had saved, proving the night nurse was dismissed for asking too many questions. Every piece fit because it had already existed in their lives long before that morning. The atmosphere shifted when Michael Reyes walked into the hospital. He came with a lawyer, dressed in an impeccable suit even at that hour, and with the controlled expression of someone used to solving problems with phone calls and signed checks. He didn't shout. He didn't lose his composure. He just looked at Anna with icy contempt and said, loud enough for everyone around to hear, "This woman is a disgruntled employee who understands nothing about medicine, nothing about family, and nothing about senile dementia. My father is ill. He needs special care. I'm arranging for his transfer to a private clinic with real specialists." The lawyer beside him nodded in agreement. "We have all the medical reports signed by Dr. Ramirez, the family's trusted physician for years. This is all a misunderstanding." Michael hadn't changed. He was still the same cold, calculating man. He had just changed his strategy. Anna felt the floor drop out from under her. The old fear returned, heavy, as lead. Fear of not being believed, fear of being destroyed, fear of having sacrificed everything, her job, her reputation, her security, for nothing. It was then that Father Michael stepped forward and put a hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone," he said, his voice low but firm. The representative from the Legal Aid Society, called urgently by Father Michael, arrived half an hour later. She was a woman in her 50s, with short hair, glasses, and a worn briefcase under her arm. She listened to Anna's account, examined the evidence, spoke briefly with Mr. Ernest, who was now more lucid, resting on an observation gurney, and turned to Michael. "I'm requesting an official investigation for abuse and false imprisonment of a vulnerable adult. The evidence is sufficient for an immediate protective order." Michael's face hardened, but he said nothing. He just nodded to his lawyer, who began to speak in complicated legal terms, trying to delay, to stall, to negotiate. Anna was called to give her formal statement. She sat in a small room with grey walls, a scratched laminate table, and a hard plastic chair. The legal aid lawyer was on one side. A clerk was on the other, fingers flying across a computer keyboard. "Ms. Anna Miller, can you please tell me in your own words everything you saw and heard?" And it was there, in that moment, that Anna faced her deepest internal conflict. She could give a soft, watered-down account, protect herself, and maybe still find work in other houses. Or she could tell every single detail, take the risk of being branded a problem, and know that it was unlikely any wealthy family would ever hire her again. She looked out the small window of the room and saw through the glass Mr. Ernest lying on the gurney, fragile, alone, alive only because she had decided not to be silent. She remembered the elderly neighbor no one had defended. She took a deep breath, squeezed the small metal cross still in the pocket of her blood and dust-stained apron, and began to speak, slowly, without embellishment, telling everything, the bruises on his arm, the smell of chlorine in the hallway, the conversations she'd overheard behind closed doors, the audio recording, the freezer, the cold body of Mr. Ernest curled up on soiled blankets. Every word was as heavy as a stone. Every sentence could close doors in her life. But Anna didn't stop. When she finished, the lawyer turned off the recorder, closed her folder and said, "You did the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you did." Anna left the room on trembling legs. She sat on a plastic bench in the hospital corridor, closed her eyes and clutched the cross inside her bruised fist. She made no speech. She didn't cry. She just whispered, so quietly only she could hear, "Give me the strength to keep going, even if no one is clapping." And she stood up again. A few months passed before the consequences settled like dust after a storm. The mansion in Ocean Ridge Estate still stood, imposing behind its white walls and red blinking cameras, but it was no longer the center of Anna Miller's life. The legal proceedings moved slowly, as they always do when money and power are involved, but they moved. The judge assigned to the case, after reviewing the reports from legal aid, the consistent testimonies, and the collected evidence, suspended Michael's guardianship over his father, and ordered that Mr. Ernest remain under the state's protection until the investigation was complete. Michael didn't lose everything. Men like him rarely do, but he had to face criminal charges for abuse of a vulnerable adult and for manipulating medical records. His image as the exemplary son cracked like fine china. The local papers reported the case discreetly. After all, the Reyes family still had powerful friends. But it was enough that the family name no longer shone with the same intensity at charity galas and business dinners. Dr. Ramirez took a plea deal. He lost his medical license for 6 months and was ordered to perform community service at a municipal geriatric care program. There, surrounded by abandoned, elderly people, controlled medications, and poor families doing their best, he saw firsthand the result of what he had done. It's unknown if it changed anything inside him, but at least for a while, he had to look into the eyes of the people he had helped to silence. Mr. Ernest, after 3 weeks in the public hospital for recovery and psychiatric observation, was discharged with a clear medical recommendation: he should not return to his son's house. By his own choice, and for the first time in years someone asked him what he wanted, he chose to move into a small apartment in the Oakwood Creek neighborhood, near the main church and the central square. It was no luxury place. The building had 3 floors, peeling paint on the facade, and an iron gate that creaked when it opened. But it had something the marble mansion never had: neighbors who greeted him by name, children playing on the sidewalk, the sound of radios from open windows, the smell of home-cooked meals rising up the stairs. It had life. It had human noise. It had dignity. Anna visited him 3 times a week, no longer as a housekeeper paid to clean floors, but as a companion paid by a municipal program created precisely because of cases like his. The work was similar: caring, listening, helping with daily tasks, but the meaning was different. For the first time, Anna felt that her humble work had a respected name, a recognized value. She always arrived in the mid-afternoon, when the sun streamed through the apartment's small windows and lit up the simple living room with its old couch and plastic table. Mr. Ernest would welcome her with reheated coffee and some simple cookies the downstairs neighbor had sent up. They talked about small things: the weather, the baseball game he'd listened to on the radio, the grandchildren Anna was raising alone. Ordinary topics that, precisely because they were ordinary, brought comfort. The symbols planted at the beginning of the story returned with new, deeper meanings. The basement freezer was no longer just a machine for storing food. It was the physical reminder of the line Anna had decided not to cross in silence. Every time she passed a supermarket and saw the huge freezers in the frozen food aisle, her stomach still twisted, but at the same time she knew she had done the right thing. The small metal cross on her keychain, now worn from the constant touch of her fingers, had become a symbol of those nights when she chose to speak. Anna wasn't religious in the sense of going to church every Sunday or praying the rosary, but that cross meant faith. Faith that doing the right thing was worth it even when the price was high. The old cell phone, with its cracked screen and a battery that held less and less charge, was stored in a shoebox under her bed. With it were the inventory logbook with the notes on the back and a copy of the complaint she had signed at the legal aid office. Proof that a simple woman, with no important last name, with no college degree, could move structures that seemed to be made of concrete. One Sunday afternoon, When the sky was clear and the breeze carried the smell of the sea, Anna and Mr. Ernest met in the central square of Oakwood Creek. He sat on a green-painted wooden bench in the shade of a golden trumpet tree that was dropping petals like confetti. She brought 2 cups of reheated coffee from the corner stand, the kind served in little plastic cups with a hole in the lid. They sat there side by side, watching life happen around them. Mothers pushing strollers, old men playing dominoes at a makeshift table, stray dogs chasing a ball, teenagers in school uniforms crossing the square with heavy backpacks. Mr. Ernest, thinner than before, but with his eyes finally clear and alert, looked at the running children and smiled. "Never thought I'd end my days here, looking at a real street instead of the ceiling of a locked room," he said, his voice still weak but steady. Anna took a sip of the warm coffee and replied with a gentle joke about how he now had more friends in the neighborhood than she did. He laughed, a quiet, rusty laugh, out of practice from so much disuse, but genuine. Julio walked through the square, on his way home from his new job as a security guard at a downtown office building. He raised a hand in greeting, and Mr. Ernest waved back. Martha crossed the street a moment later, carrying a bag of bread from the bakery, laughing loudly at something her daughter had said on the phone. She stopped to say hello, exchanged a few words, and went on her way. They were small scenes, almost invisible in the city's hurried rhythm, but for those who knew how to look, they wove something important, a real sense of belonging, of community, of not being alone. The sun began to set, painting the low buildings around the square in orange and pink. The light hit Mr. Ernest's face, soft and warm, and he closed his eyes for a moment, savoring it. Anna sat in silence, watching the sky. She thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the courage she didn't know she had, the doors that had closed, the others that had opened, the children she was still raising alone, but now with a steady job and a clear conscience. The elderly neighbor she hadn't defended years ago, but whom, perhaps in some way, she had honored by defending Mr. Ernest. She didn't need many words. She made no grand speech or promises. She just let a simple, true sentence escape, one that seemed to embrace the entire journey they had lived together. When someone has the courage to tell the truth, God makes sure they're never alone. Again. Mr. Ernest opened his eyes and looked at her. He said nothing. He just squeezed her hand with his trembling fingers, a gesture worth more than 1,000 words. And they sat there, as the afternoon turned to evening over Oakwood Creek, 2 survivors of a silent war that few people had seen, but that had changed their lives forever. The square slowly emptied. The streetlights flickered on, yellow and dim. The wind stirred the fallen petals of the trumpet tree, scattering them across the cracked cement. Anna stood up, helped Mr. Ernest to his feet, and together they walked slowly to the gate of his building. She waited until he was inside, waved to him through the window, and walked home with her heart feeling light for the first time in a long time. She was no longer afraid to speak. She was no longer ashamed of who she was. She knew now that her voice, as simple as it was, had weight. It had strength, it had importance, and that in the end was worth more than any salary a marble mansion could ever pay.